So as advertised in the agenda, what we're going to cover today is really what's the usefulness of skill tracking and tips about what to track, what not to track as far as a skill database, or at least things to consider, because every industry that uses skill database tracking has different requirements and different needs. So of course what may be good for one company may not work for another. Also how that relates to how you're planning your resources by skill, also by category. I call it job category. Depending on your technology, it could be a title or a role or a code. And then we'll talk about what are some of the reports that you should be considering that pull that information together grouped in this way so that you can use it from a variety of perspectives and make sure that you're staffing your projects with the right resources and making your customers happy. So really, what's the basic question? The basic question is, why do I have to have a skill database? I already interviewed these people. I already brought them on board. They know what they're doing, and I hired them to do job X. Really, there are benefits to having a skill database other than just general information of sharing with the company that everyone knows Jody can do X, Y, Z. There is a basic need for tracking that when you have a large organization because people just may not know about resources in other geographies. So it's always good to have that skill set documented somewhere, profile set up, so that you understand what kind of resources you have in the company. And as you grow, it becomes more and more important to share that information. But the other is also to provide something from an HR perspective that you can help with a plan, their career path plan, maybe performance monitoring, maybe a training path for them. How do they get to the next level of a consultant? How do they change their job role to be another valuable resource or asset in the company? And really, if you know what their skill set's in or where their interests are, you can actually help them put that kind of education path in place. And that way, you can use the skill database also as a way to sort of help them achieve that next level in their career. And then, of course, finally, it's really just, especially for the larger companies, you tend to focus on the people that you see sitting across the hall or that you've worked with on teams many times. But when you start running out of those resources because you're just overburdened, where else can you look? And by using the skill database, you can advertise that advertise within your own company. Hey, I've got people that have this type of language skills, this type of programming skills, this type of project management capabilities that can supplement teams and actually make your team a global team versus a local geography team. But besides just regular skills, you think of skill database, you think of just skills. But skill database can have a lot more in it, such as does the person have a passport, or do they have a H-1B visa where they can work in the U.S.? What about the certifications? Especially a lot of the technologies out there, Microsoft, Salesforce, they have a lot of certifications for different levels of capabilities. If somebody has that certification, then there's almost a knowledge level that you can assume they have, and maybe there's some RFPs or bids that you're going against that are requiring people to have certifications. So think about sort of making that Rolodex of certifications in your skill profile. Also very simple things, but things that are important to know about your resources is what's their travel preference? Are they willing to travel at any time? Would they like to limit their travel to maybe U.S. travel only? Do they, can they not travel at certain times of the year based on, maybe their family situation or, other influences? So just things that would help you make decisions as you look at resources from a staffing profile. That's a common use for skills. You're trying to find resources to fill a need. What do you need to consider in that staffing besides the fact that they have the technical know-how on how to do the work? So what are typical areas that I see customers tracking, especially in the world of professional services? And again, this is very specific to your industry, so a lot of these things are more software, consulting organizations, maybe media agencies where there's special skill sets for product knowledge. But of course, if you were a consulting organization that focused on training, you would have a slightly different version of skills. So product experience, this kind of almost applies universally, but it obviously has different types of product based on your industry. Products like, I can use Microsoft Office and Excel and things, that's more of a common thing. But I'm thinking more of, I PSA tool, Salesforce Administration. Those are sort of product experience and being able to talk about what your experience is. Industry experience, I find, is a valuable thing to track. Understanding the industry of your clients that you're working with removes a lot of terminology confusion when you're dealing with projects. Things like working with people in the environmental industry versus the software industry versus the advertising or retail industries. They all have different terminology. At the end of the day, they'll probably still use a thing like an engagement or a project or a gig for terminology, but how they execute it, maybe their roles and positions are very different. Creative director, for example, would be in a media agency, and you wouldn't necessarily have that in a software company. That would be more of a technical lead type thing. So the industry experience helps align people to just subject matter expertise and what to expect when you work with those kind of customers. Job role experience, this may be useful depending on sort of what you need. What roles have people done in past lives? They used to be a project manager and now they've moved on into programming, usually it's the reverse. Folks that could step in to take on roles that they've done in the past, maybe a program manager versus a project manager or a portfolio lead. It takes a little bit different skill set than just focusing on the project itself and the team members. I do see a lot of customers tracking soft skills, and I'm not necessarily sold on tracking soft skills simply because it's a lot of times soft skills are things that people as a professional should be able to do, and I talk a little bit about that in the next couple slides. But soft skills tend to be more subjective, and they may not be accurate very much, and I'll talk more details about what I mean by being accurate. Languages, I think, are a great one, especially can you read, can you write, are you fluent, and the different types of geographies that your customer base could potentially be in. Spanish, Portuguese, German, English, right, for those non-native English speakers, and so forth. And certifications, like we already talked about. But of course, if you want like more breakdown, if you say product experience, okay, a skill, skilled in products, there's programming languages, there's operating systems, there's equipment, so you can break that down into further detail so that you have more of a matrix to be able to look up, and it's all broken down according to what the topic really is. So here are some things I like to throw out there when I'm working with customers on skill database and how it's going to be a benefit for them to track a skill database. So what not to track. The first thing I always watch out for is the level of detail, especially if you're dealing with more technical skill database tracking. You tend to start looking at, oh, well, there's version 1.5 and version 2 and version 2.5 and so forth and so on. And when you start getting into version numbers, now you have a lot of detail in your skill database, and anything that has more detail than necessary, it makes it a hard time to keep it maintained and updated. So you could be an expert on Microsoft Windows 3 if anyone remembers that, but that was many years ago, and I personally don't know of anyone that's still using it, so that skill wouldn't be necessary to track. Things that have a big jump in technology, like Microsoft Windows 7 to 8, when all the tiles came up and the operating system completely changed. That would probably be something that you would want to track as a specific, because it's more of a different UI, maybe different approaches and navigation. And I'm using Windows in a generic sense, but anything that has a major technology jump where it looks like product X in one window and product Y in another, that could be something that you want to be able to track, because there might be specific skills necessary to be able to support that major difference between the versions. But for the most part, if you just say that I know Windows, that might be good enough level of detail to put in your skill database. The other thing to track are, track the things that are important for the business. And this is a gray area, like a lot of things are when it comes to skill databases, but what's really necessary for you to search on? What do you need to look and know about your customers or your employees to be able to staff projects? When you hire people for programming, of course, if you're a Java shop, then everyone should be able to to code Java? Do you need to track Java as a skill, right? But don't go overboard on all the different skill possibilities. I'm like, well, I need to know if you can write HTML and if you can write Java and if you can write Fortran, all kinds of different languages out there. Track the ones that you know that your business needs. I don't necessarily need to know that you're an expert culinary chef unless my business is knowing you know that industry very well, because we do consulting for restaurants and stuff like that. So try to keep the list simple, because the fewer elements that people have to maintain, update, and keep accurate, the more accurate it'll be. It'll take them less time to do. So streamline your list and make sure it's things that are important for the business to know about. Juniper Networks or Microsoft Certified Engineering. Simplify the list as much as you can. If you're never going to use a skill set, it's one of those. It would be nice if I knew people knew Oracle DBA. Then probably put that as a lower priority to include in your skill database until you get the critical ones that you search on all the time. And finally, these are don't track skills that you expect your team they have to have in order for them to even be employed in the organization. They have to have. One I see often that customers track are presentation skills. How good are you at presenting? Okay. I would argue that unless your organization is built out of capability to deliver trainers, like you have training as a position and people have to be very good at articulate, confident, they need to have all that skill sets, and they have to go to presentation certification or something. That's not a skill that you really need to track. Everyone can present. It's a matter of whether they present comfortably or not, and if they are confident in their capabilities. So things that people should be able to do, like using Microsoft Excel. I don't know if I need to track whether I know the team is an expert in Excel, because you can look up anything on Google nowadays. So I don't necessarily need to know that you work with Microsoft Office Suite. That's a pretty common skill. Even in grade school nowadays, they learn Google Docs. So those are the type of skills, the soft skills that I mentioned early on, that I typically would not recommend tracking unless it is very pertinent, obviously, to your business model, that you have expert trainers that train other people to be trainers. Then that, of course, would be something that would be more of a skill versus a soft skill. Now, once you have your skill list, then, of course, you have to do your rating of skills. It's not whether you have it or not. It's how good are you at it, right? And there's really sort of two thoughts when it comes to understanding whether you want how to set up your ratings. And it really comes down to how do you want to set up your skill profile, your skill matrix? Do you want everyone to qualify every element in your skill database to say whether they have any experience or not? In that case, your attribute list tends to be something, instead of a beginner to expert, you get something like no knowledge, and then a standard user, and then an expert or something like that. The benefit of actually having everyone fill out a value at least for every element in your skill profile, when you add a new skill profile, you can follow up and make sure that people are aware that there's a new skill in the database and that they have to qualify themselves against it in some manner. So it's a sort of a sanity check to be able to check to make sure that everyone's got skills categorized in some way across the board. Of course, if you have a very large skill database, that may be asking too much. If you have like 300 elements in it just because you're a really complex shop, asking everyone to touch every single one of those and make sure that those are up to date may be too much. So that's when you start going, well, just fill out the ones that that you've got expertise in, like a standard user, an expert user, or you're interested in learning about it. Okay. The typical skill lists that people track are things like beginner, novice, standard user, capable, or expert. I don't know how many times people would actually look up, I just need a beginner, right? So the argument is that people will always classify themselves as capable or an expert. So really, things that are more measurable are actually easier for people to select. So saying that they have 1 or 2 years of experience with it, or they've done 6 or 7 projects with it, may be more of a measurable thing to sort of showcase their expertise. versus them saying, well, I'm just a beginner in HTML, or I'm a capable person in HTML. If you do choose like a ranking, like rank yourself 1 to 10 on your capabilities of writing Java, for example, make sure you have a clear definition of 1 to 10. What does 1 mean? Does 1 mean I know how to spell Java and that's about all I can do, or is it no knowledge whatsoever, or 10 is I can train other people, I've written a book on it, just the ultimate expert. So make sure that you have a clear definition for each of those, and as much as possible, if it's possible, try to stay away from those subjective terms. Because if you have those, the more subjective terms you have, the more you have to make sure that there's somebody that's reviewing that to make sure how it's very accurate. One person calling themselves an expert, another, their manager may say they're capable because there's a whole another layer that needs to be learned to be an expert, for example. So if you use the subjective terms, put controls in place like an approval workflow to make sure that somebody's reviewing those more subjective skills if you're not able to do a 1 to 2 year, 3 to 5 year type value set. And of course, the profiles, if you rely on them for all that information, you have to keep them up to date. So if you're doing annual reviews, it's a good time to remind people to do the updates. If you have a system that can send notifications out to, hey, reminder, you're coming up on your 1 year anniversary, set up your skill profile, that would be fabulous because then people can remember to keep that up to date. But how do you use the skills besides looking people up and using them in, for updating? So I would argue that the skills support the category that you give people in the company. If you hire somebody to be a senior technical lead, there's got to be a skills profile behind that. There's got to be a category of information behind that. So the skills support basically the role or the title that you give people. When you're staffing projects, you tend to quote projects based on the level of resources you need, or there's a team concept you need. So you basically set the role for people based on their skill sets, and therefore that sort of matches all the way through. And of course, like I mentioned before, for talent management, to understand the path that you need to set people on if they want to achieve the next level. From a resource planning perspective, as you use the skill database to justify a position a person has, now that becomes very valuable so that when you're naming somebody as a senior consultant, it implies that that person has a level of knowledge, maybe not in a specific skill like a product or something, but at least they're expert in something. And now you can use that person to say, I need a senior consultant to deliver this project, and you start forecasting effort by job category, right? So if I need a senior consultant, let me look for my senior consultants. From that point, you drill down further to find out I need a senior consultant that knows Oracle PA. So therefore, you get that matchup of the skills into your resource planning. So things that you would typically track in your job category approach would be a forecast of effort, which gives you your forecast of resource need. And if you do it by job category, you not only need headcounts, you need headcounts of certain calibers or certain types. And of course, if your categories are a little more specific, like Java developers or UX designers, that gives you even more information about what kind of demand you have for different skill sets. Your full-time equivalent, or FTEs, if you're looking at your historical data in your systems, you pull your time data, you can see where you're trending as far as what types of resources you've been using based on the different categories. I've been using 3 senior consultants and 2 consultants. I've been using 7 Oracle DBAs. I've been using 8 technical leads. So those full-time equivalents, now you can compare that to your actual headcount that you have on staff. I've been using 8 technical leads, and I've only got 6. So I've been promoting someone, or the 6 have been working a lot of overtime. So where do I need to sort of add more resources, get resources on that training path to get to that next level, hire people to be able to fulfill the demand that I'm seeing historically with trending, and of course from your forecasting. And some of the tips that I would have is to set up dashboards that are regularly monitoring your historical trend and your forecast. Where have you seen your headcount, and where have you seen the effort needed by category historically? Where does it look like it's going? and then sort of considering both the hours view, which is more your full-time equivalent headcount, and your money view, which is your average bill rate times your capacity or your target utilization, and being able to get that money comparison to see how close are you going to be able to get to your revenue plan if everyone, if the demand is fulfilled based on the types of resources that you have or that you hire, and the resources deliver based on what you're expecting to deliver. Some other tips are, the skills and the roles or categories go hand in hand, because it really makes sure that you're using the right resources and staffing them on the right projects. So it's critical to your staffing, your scheduling approach, is to be able to have, resources. A lot of they start off knowing everything, so they know what resources can category needs for the resources you're looking up, and then being able to resource to the role of someone else. If you've done project management in a past life and now you are a trainer, maybe get pulled to do project management. I would strongly suggest, if you start pulling resources to fulfill other types of roles on projects, that you track that in some way, because your demand is not for that trainer, your demand is for that project manager. And by tracking that actual delivery role, you would be able to understand what your demand is, what your trending and your demand is, versus your capacity of what you have on staff to match that up, right? To match how many trainers do I need, how many project managers do I actually need, and do I need to start looking at the mix of skill sets that I have on the team and change those in some way? Do I need to enhance that in some way? If you use reports and dashboards, that's going to really highlight the types of skills you need. If you use generic type resource categories like senior consultant, that may not tell you much depending on your industry. If you make it a little bit more specific, like mobile designer, mobile app designer, Salesforce admin, those actually may give you more information, because if you're rolling information up by those categories, you'll be able to also do forecasts by those categories and then look at your headcount capabilities to see if you have the right headcount to be able to deliver on those services. And then finally, my big thing is the forecasting. Forecasting it is by itself. I don't know if I would track it as a skill database, but forecasting is an art. Really, it's sort of you're taking your best guess on how this project's going to execute, the types of resources you're going to need, but kind of going back in time and checking how accurate your forecast was based on actuals, I think it's really helpful, because the more accurate your forecast, the more accurate your demand, and the more time you may give yourself to be able to change your staffing mix, hire people, get subcontractors in the door. So making sure that you're confident in your forecast by double checking against the accuracy against actuals really kind of cements your approach within the organization. So really the whole skill tracking, it really should support your business needs, and keep it simple and direct in what's critical to the business. And whenever possible, make sure you have something measured to put into the skill database. 1 to 2 years experience, expert, triple secret agent may be a little bit more difficult unless you have very clear definitions about what those terms are when people select their skill profiles. Make sure that you have some kind of protocol in place for regular update. Nothing's worse than putting a lot of initiative effort into setting up that initial database, get everyone to get their skill profiles in, and 45 days later it's out of date, and then it's not used. And all that valuable effort that you spent, it doesn't bring the value going forward. So make sure that you have some kind of cadence in place to be able to have regular monitoring procedures. Use skills that support your job categories so that when you pick a database lead, what could potentially be behind that based on your typical resource hiring. And measure your demand by those categories, because that will tell you where the mix of need is coming in based on your skills and your resource scheduling.